Hello, and welcome to this episode of Apolitical Month and More. And this week we are met with a very special guest,
Hi.
Yari
Yeah.
Valtean. If you want to just clarify who you are, and yeah.
Yeah. Hi. My name is Yari. I am also sometimes known as Rose. I am the chair of the United States Pirate Party. And we are a political party, a third political party, a small third political party that is committed to a bunch of things: free culture, free information, civil liberties, digital liberties, and privacy and government transparency.
Yeah. All right. So one of the biggest things I noticed with the Pirate Party, I'll mention it to somebody and they'll be like, is that a joke? This is a political party named after actual pirates. So do you
Yeah,
want to clarify, like, what are the big policy positions of the US Pirate Party?
sure. Yeah, we do get that a lot, of course. But we are very serious about what we're doing. And the name actually came from our commitment to came from our commitment to digital liberties as one of our core founding tenets. That is one of our major concerns here as well. But we have a lot of things that we have come to as we grew as a political party. We're only 15 years old as a political party, which is relatively young in the grand scheme of political parties. And we care about, like I said, free culture, free information, and what that means is copyright reform. That means government transparency. That means government accountability. That means participatory democracy. So in terms of making sure that people are involved in their democracy, and that there are ways to involve people in the democracy. Right now, the United States is much more qualified to be an oligarchy, if anything, and I guess you could call it a republic if you are being very generous. But really, we want to build more democratic, more direct democratic structures. And so finding ways to do that using technology. And that's sort of why, because of our technological bent, because of our more internet savvy bent, we also really care about those digital liberties as well as civil liberties. So in the digital liberties realm, we have been thinking a lot about privacy and internet privacy, anonymity on the internet, and your rights, individual rights as a user of the internet and as a user of tech. So thinking about how individuals, your rights as a person online do not end when you close your computer, do not end when you put down your phone, right? And they, you should have rights to your information regardless of whether you are online or not, and that your information is your information. It doesn't belong to the website that you are on. There was some really wonderful wins in the European Union around that recently. But we think that could go even further, really. And in terms of civil liberties, there's things like, we support the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, really basic stuff, which is bizarre because the United States does not necessarily agree with a lot of those things despite signing it. We are anti-war because war is anti-human. We are for universal basic income for the most part. Although we have some internal discussion and debate about how that should be done, of course. We are for we support refugees. So, just basic human rights things that really we think should be a thing that everyone can agree upon. And really a party, right? As we are only 15 years old, I think a party not mired in the filth, I want to say, but that's not the right word. Not mired in the, not bogged down in the politics of the past. We are a young party and we care about the issues of the present. And so we care about, your rights on the internet and also the politics of the modern age.
Yeah, thank you. So you talk about a lot of policies there, right? So the copyright reform, I know the Pirate Party talks about patent reform.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see like these things being implemented in the US? I know the Pirate Party does hold some seats in parliament in some European countries, but here in the US, like if the Pirate Party, snap of the fingers, they have the majority in the House and the Senate, how do you implement these ideas?
Yeah, it's a long road. It's a long road. I hear that. I think here's the thing is we won't necessarily, that snap of the fingers is not going to happen, right? It is through the collective effort of many that we get to that point. And that's something that we have been working on building. I think that, building a movement in many ways is more important than getting individuals in those specific seats, especially because at the end of the day, as much as, those wins are great, don't get me wrong, but at the end of the day, the local seats and the local policymakers are what make a lot of decisions that affect people the most, right? And so if I could go like, hey, I want 300 pirates in office, who would I choose? Would it be the entire Congress or would it be more local positions? I would actually go for local positions more, right? Because I would say that affects the lives of individuals in a lot stronger of ways. So that's my pick there. I think that either way, it's going to be a fight, right? Either way, it's going to be a long, drawn out, difficult process of collective building. And that's something that we're ready for and something that we're working on. So it's an exciting process.
Yeah. Regarding to the local elections, how do those local elections really affect like your internet privacy or and all of these like big reforms, these big ideas that the Pirate Party is focused on, especially from a digital perspective, considering a lot of the laws that dictate that are at a federal level currently?
Well, so that's a good point. And is a lot of these, I actually got involved with this process when we were sort of in the difficult process of working and campaigning against SESTA and FOSTA, and these sort of, like you say, national laws and national difficult issues that would harm internet privacy. And I do want to really point out that while this is a really important issue for us, it isn't our only issue, but it is something that we care about, yes. And so we were absolutely campaigning against that. And I think that by working with other groups, right? Again, the Pirate Party wasn't the only group working against that, but by working with other groups, we were able to help build the collective strength against issues like that, right? And so it is through those sort of, on those national issues, on those international issues as well, right? By working with collective groups at the local level, by working organizationally and across, I want to say across the spectrum, by working at those organizational levels, we can help build collective unity on those issues that are more national. We can appeal to organizations and say, hey, this affects you too, And we have been doing that. We've been building coalitions, and that's about coalition building a lot more on those issues. And you know, by building those coalitions, then we can take that to Congress, then we can take that to those higher institutions, and we have that whole coalition of their constituents, right? And we say, this is, you either don't do this or you do this, or your election is at stake. And usually they listen to that.
Yeah, so in terms of the Pirate Party, right? So your theory kind of can be summarized by, you want to run at a local level, and at a national level, you know, you're going to work to that point to reach that relevancy level.
Mm-hmm.
So from a policy perspective, though, one of the things I have a massive question about is the patent reform. On the platform, right, on the US Pirate Party's website, it essentially says that patents are not great and they hinder the innovation that we all want. Though I question here, especially for like smaller businesses and new businesses, if we don't allow them to get patents, their ability to innovate without larger corporations stepping in and stealing their products, how do we avoid that from happening? Those larger corporations that have more resources, more money, more ability, more influence, that smaller business has a new product, how do they thrive without the ability to?
Right. So that is also why we are fundamentally, as a party, anti-monopoly, right? I think this is why this is always a two-pronged approach, is because you need to be thinking about, if you are thinking about the interests of individuals who care about their financial well-being and who care about their products, as you say, you need to think about this as what is essentially an anti-corporate approach. And that's what it is. That's what it is. It is an anti-large corporation approach. It is because patents and copyrights have been and still are fundamentally tied up with large corporations. They are lobbied for by large corporations, and they are pushed, they are maintained by large corporations, and they are mostly held by large corporations. So if we are going to fight to take those down, what we are fighting is large corporations. And that's why that two-pronged approach is important. It's always going to be not just copyright and patent reform. It's always going to also be, are we fighting against monopolies? Are we fighting for protections for small businesses?
Right. Yeah, I can see that a lot of these ideas seem to be sort of on the progressive spectrum, right? The anti-corporation sentiment, the greater desire to allow the people to have more power in general. What sort of like ideologies generally are part of the Pirate Party coalition, right? What people generally tend to like appreciate these ideas appeal to?
Yeah, we get people from a wide variety of ideologies, which is really cool. I think these ideas, and because these ideas are fundamentally a very present, very grounded in the present, right? The things that we're talking about, these internet-centric or internet-focused ideas, and also thinking about civil liberties, human rights, thinking about things like participatory democracy, right? The people want, you know, I want, you want, everyone else wants to have more of a say in how their own life works, right? And that includes how we live on the internet. That includes how our information is handled, right? That includes how the securities of our internet are run. And so these things are important to all of us. I don't think that it's necessarily, even though it could be framed typically as a more progressive position, I agree. I don't think it's necessarily the positions that the pirates hold dear necessarily appeal to one specific ideology over the other. They are in the world much more middle of the spectrum in a certain way, and so we do tend to get people from all over. These are really just common sense ideals, and so I think what we're really pushing for here is just thinking about what should be done, what makes sense to be done, what is rational, and saying, let's do that. This is supported by scientific evidence. Let's do that thing. And then also let's make sure that we have the ability to do more rational things. And that's really, it's not a very radical idea. It's very much a baseline. And for those who do think it's radical, I think they might need to reframe their politics, frankly. So that's me, but perhaps I've been stewing in this a bit too long. So in terms of the people that we get, they're all over because of that. I think we attract a lot of people who are attracted to that sort of rational thought. I want to say it's all over just because to list them would take too long.
Yeah, I think we notice a lot this desire for internet privacy, more civil liberties for people, but I don't think our big parties truly represent those ideas enough as much as they should compared to how much voters care about them. They talk, we're stuck up on issues like critical race theory and things of this sort that ultimately push us away from a lot of these ideas that matter more in Americans' eyes, on a general sense. The Pirate Party believes, though, that people should be more involved in government, right? So a lot of the traditional things we think of here, right? It's the campaign finance reform. It's, the people say being really heard more. How else do you see this, though, being implemented?
I think having people more involved in government, that can take a lot of forms, right? So what that primarily is, in the big broad strokes, is it can be instant runoff voting, something as simple as that, and something that so many people care about and that so many people want to see happen. We are working with people on making that coalition right now. So instant runoff voting is a very important thing that the Pirate Party cares about. Not just because we are a third party and it would benefit us, but it would also do that. But it's also something that just makes sense, right? To make sure that your vote matters, to make sure that you as a citizen in what should be a democracy can have a voice, right? So something as simple as that, right? Having that change would immediately make your voice matter more, would make you more of a participant. Other simple things, if things like California's what are they called? I am blanking on the term. I don't want to say it's proposals, but it's the laws that California sometimes passes that are voted on by the populace. And I am blanking on the term for some reason.
Sort of like direct democratic.
Proposition. There we go. It's a proposition. So they're called propositions in California. But yes, they are laws that the populace votes on. So they need to get a certain percentage of the populace signing off on them in order to even go to the general vote, but they aren't passed by the legislature. They are passed by a general vote. And that immediately, same sort of thing. It is a law that becomes law that is not passed by the legislature, that is just voted into being by the populace, right? Or voted not into being by the populace, depending on how the vote goes. Again, direct democracy in action. So these are very simple changes that have already been tried in some states. Instant runoff voting is a thing in Massachusetts. And on the other coast, right, we got propositions in California. So, and those are both working just fine. And so if we instituted these on a national level, I can see nothing but benefit. In addition, we could have things like holidays for voting, or more protections for voting, or we could have things like I just had one that I was thinking of and that I am blanking on, but those are good suggestions. There's lots of ways that we can make this whole process more equitable and make sure that people are able to have their voice heard in the process. So I think, you know, regardless of whether this is, one thing that we really care about as pirates, this is what I was going to say. One thing that we really care about as pirates, right, as always, is the fact that technology has is very powerful. Technology is very powerful for good or for ill. And we've seen that across the board. And the power that it holds to potentially be integrated into our elections should not be, overlooked. So it has been used effectively, integrated into elections. And I don't just mean like electronic vote counters, because generally those things are a thing of the past, and we've moved on from that and realized that that's not necessarily a good idea. But what I am talking about is things like, perhaps this has not been tried, an electronic voter record or something like that. We already have something like that. And because already local groups, states have a record of who voted for which party and in what elections. And so having a voter roll like that, instead of when you come into the polls, you go to register and they have to do it on paper, having a voter roll like that and just think you check in, right, super easy, makes more sense. Making that check-in process easier, making that voting process easier, right? Anything that we can do to make the whole process of democracy smoother for the constituents, I think is a win.
Yeah, I mean, I think the US system in general is just very hostile to third parties. The idea that, especially in individual districts, you have to get a majority of the vote.
And to say nothing of, and this is something that has been really bothering us recently, to say nothing of the signature requirements that you need to get on the ballot in the first place, and how wildly different they are for third parties versus the Democratic and Republican parties. They are absurdly large in some states, depending on the state. It's dependent on the state too, and depending on the district. It is absurdly large in some districts for third parties compared to the Democrat and Republican parties.
Yeah, I mean, approaching the third party issue, I think there's a lot of, like approaches to it, but I'm personally a proponent of a system where, the whole country would vote, and then based on that, we could proportionally have representation in Congress, right? So if the Pirate Party got 5% of the vote nationally, it wouldn't have to be concentrated in, 2-3 districts. They would get that 5% representation in Congress.
Mm-hmm.
I believe a couple European countries have a similar system. Mm-hmm. I know in Sweden, they have a system where they have 50 or so seats set aside. And at the end of voting, they put all the people in. and then they use those seats to fix everything, to make sure everything's proportional to how people actually voted.
Yes, and this is actually, so a similar system is used in a number of countries. You're absolutely right. And those systems, in many cases, are where the Pirate Party internationally has received a number of gains. Most recently, in the Czech Pirate Party has gotten, I think, I don't remember the exact number of seats, and I probably should have looked it up before this, but it was, I want to say, on the order of the Czech Pirate Party itself received on the order of 7 seats in Congress, and then their coalition, together with the other party that they're in coalition with, who they've been working with very closely, very, very closely, they're pretty much tied together, received almost a third. So they're doing really well.
Yeah. I think the proportional system is simply the most effective way of getting third parties represented properly. I think we notice this as a whole everywhere, but oh, I forgot what I was gonna bring up. But okay, so how do you the runoff voting, right? So as I understand it, or okay, I remember what I was gonna say. So I think in our current system, what it does to third parties, right, is it kind of scares people away from voting for them, right? So if you're a Democrat or Republican, hey, if you vote for the Pirate Party, right, you're simply vote splitting, right? You're taking away votes from the member of the party that you subscribe to that could actually win, even if that party doesn't exhibit all of your proper beliefs.
Yeah, so under first past the post voting, that's certainly the case. And under instant runoff voting, the idea, instant runoff, or I can't remember the other name for it off the top of my head, but there is another name for it. But under that system of voting, that would not be the case, right? Because so that's one of the reasons why we prefer it, and why many other countries prefer it as well. You select your first choice and your second choice and your third choice or fourth, etc., on down the line. The other thing, though, is even in first past the post voting, what we try to do here in the US, because almost all of the US is a first past the post system, you get 50%, you win, right? And what we try and do is we try and run, are trying to run pirates in uncontested elections, because 70% of the elections in the United States are uncontested. And that's wild, that so many elections are uncontested. It's roughly 70%. I'm not sure if I'm remembering that figure exactly correct, but it's somewhere around there. And for it to be anywhere near that high, right, just tells you how bizarrely undemocratic our quote unquote democracy is, right? If even it is purportedly a Republican system, you should have, if even it's a two-party purportedly Republican system, you should have 2 candidates running for each one. You should have at least the 2 shit choices, excuse my language. But here we have one choice and no other. So it's like, okay, that's no choice. That leaves you with more than half of your elections where you have nothing that you can choose. At least more than half of your candidate elections. So it seems like already it's showing that this whole system is inherently undemocratic. And so what we'd like to do more than anything is at the very least just put candidates in those elections just to at least provide a choice. At the very least, provide an alternative just to point out, hey, this isn't okay. You should at least have a choice. Even if you don't pick our person, that's fine, but have a choice. That would be cool, right? So that's a good way of going about things, I think. And that allows for people to have a choice without this concept of vote splitting. And then you're just voting between these two candidates, ours and the other person. It positions us in a place of, we're just trying to give people a choice between two things. And also, more to the point, even if we do ever get to the position of vote splitting, which I think is mostly thought of, it's mostly thought of in the situation of something like a presidential election, right? That's when most people think of it, right? They're like, oh, you're in the presidential election and you're going to split the vote, right? Because everyone has memories of Bush versus Gore, right? And other elections like that, where it's like, okay, you split the vote and now my candidate didn't win. And sure, I guess that can happen. The thing is, there is always a certain element of voting for a third party that is a little bit like a protest vote. Yes, in situations like that, where you're basically saying, this choice between these two candidates is flawed, and I'm choosing not to choose. I am choosing the third option. I am choosing to say, no, I don't like this false choice, because it is a false choice. It is fundamentally a false choice. And I think we've seen that more and more in the past large scale elections, that at the end of the day, in the United States, when you are looking at these big, instantiated political figures, that they are not going to fight the status quo. No matter what they say on the campaign trail, they're not going to fight the status quo. They might shift it a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right, but they're not going to fight it, right? And so voting for a third party candidate is, at its core, a fight against the status quo. That vote is a protest vote, no matter what. So that's why I like the protest vote. That's why I like this idea of like, no, I am going to go and vote for a third party candidate because I don't like this system as it is, because it isn't a democracy, because it isn't representing me, because it isn't allowing me an actual choice, because these two choices are the same choice, because both of them are pro status quo. I refuse this choice. It is a false choice. And I fundamentally, I like that as a third option of refusing that option, of refusing those choices. That said, most of the time, we're not even going to be in the presidential election. We're going to be down here in the trenches doing the actual work of providing choices where there is no choice at all, not even a false one, which I think is even better work.
Yeah, I think that idea of a false choice is really an idea that a lot of people don't seem to understand, right? They'll be like, oh, I like this party, but not this idea. Well, there's probably a party that represents that sort of ideal. You just have to find it. But
Mm-hmm.
in these uncontested elections, I also think though that the benefit isn't even that creating a choice. It's also the idea that you as a party can get your name out there and fight the idea that the U.S. Pirate Party is a joke based on a bunch of dress up pirates. And but in these local elections, how do you approach being competitive in them, right? How do you approach fighting these people who have likely been in there for possibly even decades, running
Yeah.
uncontested, because anybody who runs against them will likely lose. How do you fight that that name recognition that that existing person already has?
Yeah, and I think I mean, that's an excellent question. It also hits on sort of this idea of how do we even progress as a party, and get our ideas out there in the first place. I think part of it is this sort of immediate hook of the name, which is fun. Pun not intended, but pun now recognized. The name Pirate Party immediately is to our benefit a little bit because it causes people to think twice about it, right? We're not the America something something party. I don't even want to name names because I'm afraid of accidentally naming a fascist party, because there's probably one out there with America in its name. Here's the thing, we are the Pirate Party, and we care about our name because it is not just a way of getting people to think twice about us. It is not just propaganda. It is also a really a fundamental insistence on some of our core values. And that, I think, is really wonderful. When in an era when the Democratic Party is no longer Democratic and the Republican Party is no longer Republican, but nearly, I say it, a little bit leaning towards fascist, which is scaring me. That aside, it is, I think, more important than ever that we have parties that stick to their name and their ideals. And so it is really nice to see that. It is really nice to see that our members, that our candidates are pirates. And not because they dress up, but because they care about fighting the status quo, because they care about digital and civil liberties, because they care about the idea of personal privacy no matter where you travel, right? And so holding to those core ideas is really important, and I think that's really great. And yeah, it does serve a little bit of like a, people say Pirate Party, what's that? You got to be joking. And then that's a foot in the door. We get to explain it, which is really nice. So it does serve a little bit to our benefit, and I'm not gonna look that gift horse in the mouth too much, which is nice. So that said, yeah, name recognition is hard to fight, and just being there for those uncontested elections, though, being there and providing a choice sometimes is enough. And if you keep showing up and providing the choice where before there was none, if you be stubborn, eventually it, I think, helps, and it does eventually get people turning their heads and thinking, well, maybe that's a party I could actually align with.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this conversation. I really appreciate it. And I really think that a lot of these ideas are ideas that we lose sometimes. We don't think about the third parties and how we can really fix our systems at a big level to increase our civil liberties and things of this sort.
Yeah, thank you so much, Liam. I really appreciate the conversation. So I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.